Winterfell stood cold and silent under the grey skies. Snowflakes fell slowly, covering the stone walls and the training yard in a soft white blanket. Inside the great hall, Lord Ned Stark sat alone, a heavy look in his eyes. War was coming. The news from King's Landing was full of whispers about the Lannisters, about Robert's failing health, and about the growing dangers from the east. But Ned Stark was not thinking about politics. He was thinking about his family. He had made a decision, one he never thought he would make. Jon Snow stood before him, unsure why he had been called. He still remembered the sting in Catelyn's eyes every time he walked through the halls. He knew he didn't belong, not fully, but Winterfell was still his home. Ned looked up at Jon and said quietly, "You must lead the north, Jon. I'm going south with the king. I fear I may not return." Jon's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm a Snow. I'm not—" "You are my son," Ned interrupted. "You have Stark blood. You know the people. You've trained with Roderick. You understand duty and honor. You may not carry my name, but you carry my values. Robb is young. Bran is a child. The North needs strength while I'm gone." Jon didn't know what to say. For years he dreamed of being more than the bastard in the shadows. But now, when the dream stood in front of him, it felt too heavy. "Will the lords even follow me?" he asked. "They will if you act like a Stark. Speak little, listen more, protect the North. That is all I ask." Jon nodded slowly. It wasn't acceptance, it was duty. The next morning, Ned left with the royal caravan. Robb stood next to Jon on the battlements, watching their father disappear into the snow. "He chose you," Robb said, with a strange tone in his voice, part pride, part jealousy. Jon didn't respond. He was thinking of the words Ned had whispered to him just before leaving. "There's more to your blood than you know, Jon. One day, the truth will find you." He didn't understand it then, but those words stayed in his mind like a storm waiting to break. Days turned into weeks. As word spread across the north that Jon Snow was holding Winterfell in Lord Stark's absence, reactions were mixed. Some laughed, others whispered, but some, especially the younger bannermen, respected Jon. He listened to their concerns. He walked the grounds, spoke to the blacksmiths, trained with the guards, and helped in the small folks' problems. Unlike many lords, Jon did not act like he was above them. Then came the raven. It arrived during dinner, the blackbird cutting through the silence as it landed on the window ledge. Maester Luwin read the message with shaking hands. His voice trembled as he said, "Lord Eddard has been arrested, charged with treason by Queen Cersei." The hall fell silent. Jon stood up slowly. His heart pounded. "This is a lie," he said. "My father would never betray the king." "But the king is dead," Maester Luwin whispered. "Robert Baratheon is gone, and now Joffrey sits the throne." Robb slammed his fist on the table. "We must call the banners. We march to war." Jon said nothing. The fire behind his eyes was calm but fierce. He remembered Ned's last words. He had to protect the North. But now the North was in danger, because Winterfell's honor was being dragged in the mud, and if the Lannisters thought they could play with Stark blood without paying the price, they were wrong. The hall at Winterfell buzzed with angry voices. The bannermen shouted over one another, some demanding war, others urging caution. The names Lannister and traitor rang through the stone walls like curses. Robb's fury was loud, but it was Jon who stood still, calm, watching everyone argue. He didn't speak until the room fell into an uneasy silence. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "If we let them kill my father, they'll never stop. The North will be next." All heads turned to him. Some looked surprised, others skeptical. Jon Snow, the bastard, speaking as if he were Lord. But he didn't back down. He walked forward, his dark eyes firm. We do not act now, they'll think we are weak. We don't strike, they'll keep striking. Not just at our family, but at our people. The Lannisters will bleed the north dry if we let them." Great John Umber, a big man with a loud mouth, slammed his mug on the table and barked, "You speak bold for a snow. What right do you have to talk of war?" John looked him dead in the eye. "I don't have the name, but I have Stark blood. I was raised beside Robb, trained beside him, fought beside him. If that's not enough for you, then leave. But I'll not sit idle while they take my father's head." The room went quiet again. Surprisingly, it was Lady Mage Mormont who spoke next. "He speaks true. Stark or Snow, he stands for the North." One by one, the other bannermen nodded. Not because they all trusted John, but because he reminded them of Ned, calm, direct, with the kind of strength that didn't shout. It stayed steady like Winterfell's walls. Later that night, Robb and John stood alone in the Godswood. The trees whispered in the cold wind. Robb's jaw was tight. He kicked at the snow. "It should be me," he said, "father's heir, the true-born son." John looked at his brother, pain in his voice. "Do you think I asked for this?" "No," Robb said quickly. "I don't. But it's hard. I feel like I'm watching someone live the life meant for me." John nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I never wanted it. All I ever wanted was to belong." They stood in silence, two brothers torn by blood and names, yet tied by something deeper. That night, John made a decision. If they were going to face war, they couldn't wait for the Lannisters to strike first. And more importantly, they couldn't rely only on the old houses. He sent ravens, not just to the bannermen, but to the outcasts, the forgotten and the free folk near the Frostfangs. He remembered what the world didn't understand. Strength wasn't always in names or banners. Sometimes it was in the people no one noticed. Days. Later, a scout rode into Winterfell with news that chilled the bones. "The Boltons," he panted. "They've raised their banners, but not for the Starks." John's fists clenched. "For the Lannisters." The scout nodded. "They say Roose Bolton sees more gold in southern loyalty than in northern honor." The betrayal cut deep. John gathered his council. "The Boltons know our lands, our weaknesses. If they join with the Lannisters, they'll be the first sword against us. Then we must strike first," said Sir Roderick. "No," John replied. "We do not play their game. We fight like wolves, quiet, smart, and without mercy." The North began to prepare. Under John's command, Winterfell became more than a castle. It became a fortress. Food was stocked. Archers trained daily. Traps were set along the woods, and then the second raven came. Ned Stark had been executed, beheaded on the steps of the Sept of Baelor, publicly, without mercy. The news hit Winterfell like a sword to the gut. John locked himself in his chambers. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He sat in silence, staring at the candlelight, remembering the last time he saw his father's eyes. Calm, sad, and full of secrets. The next day he walked to the courtyard and gathered every man, woman, and child. He stood before them, no crown, no title, only a sword and a name most didn't respect. But when he spoke, they listened. "They killed my father," he said. "Not in battle, not by justice, but by pride and fear. The Lannisters think we'll bend, that we'll bow, that we're too far and too cold to matter." He raised Longclaw, the sword Lord Commander Mormont had gifted him when he left for the Wall, which he never reached. "I say we show them what northern blood really means." The cheers were not loud. They were deep, grounded, from the soul, the kind of noise only broken people make when they choose to fight instead of die. Robb walked up beside him and took John's arm. "Then let's make them fear the snow." And so it began. Not just a march to war, but the rise of a new kind of North, one not ruled by names or blood, but by unity, by defiance, by something colder than winter and sharper than any sword, because the Lannisters had killed a Stark, and in doing so, they woke the wolf that had been sleeping too long. The march began under heavy skies. Snow fell thicker with each passing day, and the old King's Road was lined with frost-covered trees like silent watchers. Jon Snow rode at the front of the column, the Stark direwolf banner flapping behind him. Robb rode just behind, commanding the flanks, while Sir Rodrik Cassel oversaw discipline among the foot soldiers. But this was no regular army. The northern host looked different now, leaner, grittier. Men from forgotten valleys and old hill clans rode beside noble sons. Wildlings who had crossed the Frostfangs under truce, angry at the Boltons for burning their villages. Even some Night's Watch deserters, bitter and scarred, had come south, offering blades in secret. Jon hadn't turned them away. He knew better than anyone. Honor didn't win wars. Will did. They reached the Neck by the 5th day, where the marshes made travel near impossible. They camped by a lake, cold winds blowing from the east. At night, wolves howled in the dark, and men told stories of ghostly shapes moving in the trees. That evening, Jon stood over the map with Robb. "Sir, Rodrik and Lady Mormont, the Boltons have taken Baritton," Rodrik said. "They've dug in, and with Lannister gold they've fortified it." Robb spat into the snow. "Cowards hiding behind coin," Lady Mormont frowned. "They've got more men. We attack head-on. We bleed too much." Jon tapped the map with his finger. "Then we don't go head-on. We surround them, cut their supply lines, starve them out." "And if they get reinforcements from the twins?" Robb asked. Jon looked up. "They won't, because I've already sent someone to deal with Walder Frey." Robb raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Jon hesitated, then answered, "Arya." Everyone went quiet. "She's alive." Urda in her eyes, and something colder than northern snow. She didn't want glory or revenge. She wanted silence. Justice delivered with a whisper. 3 nights later, word reached the northern camp that Walder Frey had choked to death at his feast, and his sons poisoned soon after. The twins were in chaos. Jon didn't smile when he heard the news. He only said, "We march." They moved fast. No horns, no banners. The army cut through the frozen moors like wolves stalking prey. By the time they reached Baritton, the Boltons were still waiting for a traditional siege. They didn't expect the traps or the fires at their supply lines. They didn't expect their riders to go missing in the mist. Jon had learned much from the old rangers at Castle Black. Fear and confusion were weapons too. On the 5th night of the siege, a Bolton knight rode out to parley. He was tall, cruel-eyed, and confident. He looked at Jon and sneered. "The bastard leads now. What's next? Dire wolves marrying sheep." The men laughed. Robb stepped forward, hand on his sword, but Jon held up a hand. "I've been called worse," Jon said quietly. "But you won't call me anything once your mouth is full of blood." The knight smirked. "Big words from a Snow." Jon's eyes were cold. "It's not my name you should fear. It's the silence after it." He turned and walked away. That night, a quiet squad moved through the marsh behind Baritton. Arya had taught Jon some tricks, not with blades, but with movement. Distraction. Chaos. When the fires started inside the Bolton camp and the wolves howled from every side, the defenders panicked. Jon's forces charged the main gate, not to fight, but to keep them looking the wrong way. Meanwhile, wildlings and hill tribes climbed over the walls from the rear, cutting through the sleeping tents like blades through cloth. It was over. By morning, Jon stood in the center of Baritton, blood on his sword, breath heavy in the winter air. The Bolton banners burned behind him. Bodies were being piled and buried, but Rose Bolton wasn't among them. "He fled in the night," Lady Mormont growled. "Coward." Jon shook his head. "He's heading south, probably to Harrenhal or King's Landing." "Let him run!" Robb said. "We've taken his power. We've proven the North won't kneel." But Jon wasn't satisfied. They had won a battle, not the war. Cersei still ruled in King's Landing. Joffrey still wore a crown stained with his father's blood. And somewhere deep in the south, the real threat remained, not just Lannisters, but something darker rising beyond the wall. Jon could feel it, even now. As the men cheered and feasted in victory, Jon stood alone at the edge of camp. Ghost appeared silently beside him, red eyes glowing like embers. Jon looked up at the black sky. The stars were fading behind strange clouds. The wind had changed, and in the distance, carried on the icy wind, came a sound that chilled his blood. A horn. Not a war horn, but a warning one. From the far north, from beyond the wall. The horn echoed across the sky like a dying scream, low and long, swallowed by the wind. Jon's breath caught in his throat. He'd heard that sound once before, years ago at Castle Black, but this time it was different. This wasn't a call for help, it was a warning, a distant cry from a world that had long been forgotten. Ghost's ears twitched. The direwolf let out a low growl, teeth bared toward the north. Robb found Jon standing still, staring into the wind. "What was that?" he asked. Jon didn't answer right away. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, as if they were seeing something. "Far beyond Baritton's walls." "A horn," he said finally. "From beyond the wall." Robb frowned. "The wildlings?" Jon shook his head. "No, it's worse than wildlings." That night Jon didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the light dancing across his face. He was remembering things, Sam's fearful voice in the library, the old tales of the first men, and most of all, the corpses that didn't stay dead. He had fought one of them once, with Lord Commander Mormont, deep in the cold. He still remembered, the eyes, blue, glowing, empty. Jon stood up and went to the Maester's tent. Maester Luwin, though old, still travelled with them, keeping scrolls and reports. "I need a raven," Jon said. "To Castle Black." Maester Luwin raised an eyebrow. "Another war?" Jon's face was grim. "Something worse than war." By the next morning, Jon had sent ravens to Castle Black, to White Harbour, and to Bear Island. He also sent one to Dragonstone, though he wasn't sure why. Something inside him told him that fire might be needed before this was over. That same morning, a rider arrived at camp, half frozen, barely alive. The man collapsed before he could even speak. His hands were black with frostbite, and his eyes wide with terror. Robb and Jon stood beside him as Maester Luwin tried to save what little life remained. With his last breath, the man whispered one word, "Eastwatch." Then he died. No one said a word for a long time. Later, around the war table, Jon looked at his commanders. "We've done what we set out to do. The Boltons are broken. The North stands united again. But now something worse is coming, something even the Lannisters can't stop." Robb crossed his arms. "We still have to deal with the South. Father's death has to be avenged." Jon nodded slowly. "I haven't forgotten. But if we lose the North now, there won't be anything left to protect. What's coming? It's not politics, it's death." Lady Mormont stood. "You want to march to the wall?" "No," Jon said. "I'll go myself, with a few trusted men. This army has bled enough. Let the rest return to Winterfell." Robb slammed his fist down. "You're not going alone, I'm coming with you." Jon looked at him and said nothing. Then finally, "Then bring your sword, but don't bring vengeance, bring fire." Jon, Robb, Ghost, and a group of 30 hand-picked warriors rode north, not with glory, but with grim purpose. Among them were wildling scouts, former brothers of the Night's Watch, and 2 of the Mormont girls, trained in mountain warfare. They rode through Last Hearth, where the Umber Keep stood cold and abandoned. The hearth hadn't burned in weeks. The halls were empty. No blood, no bodies. Just silence. They didn't stay long. As they rode further north, the weather turned cruel. The sky lost color, and the wind bit like steel. The forest grew strange, too quiet, as if the animals had long since fled. Even Ghost was restless, his growls low and constant. Then, at dusk on the 6th day, they saw the first signs, a tree near the King's Road, twisted and black, with 6 heads nailed to it. The heads were frozen, the eyes wide and blue. Not Bolton. Men, not northern soldiers. These were free folk, wildlings. John dismounted and approached slowly, his breath misting in the air. One of the heads blinked. He jumped back. The group drew their swords, but John lowered his. "No, don't fight them here. We burn them." And they did. With firewood and oil, they set the tree ablaze. The heads screamed. Not with voices, but with the horrible sound of cracking ice and sizzling flesh. Ghost howled at the flames as, if mourning something no one else could see. That night John sat by the fire, and Rob came to him quietly. "I've followed you into battle. I've seen what you've become. You're not the boy I grew up with." John didn't look up. "Neither are you." Rob sat beside him. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" John nodded. "I didn't know when. But I saw it once beyond. The wall, dead men who walk, a king made of ice, and an army that doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, and doesn't stop." Rob whispered, "How do you fight death?" John looked into the flames. "You don't. You burn it." By the time they reached Castle Black, it was worse than John feared. The gate was broken. The walls were manned by a few tired, wounded brothers. Sir Alistair Thorne was dead, and Bowen Marsh wore the black cloak now, face pale with terror. "Eastwatch is gone," he told John. "They came from the sea, on dead ships, things that looked like men. They broke through before we could light." "The beacons and the wall?" John asked. Bowen looked at him, eyes hollow. "Still standing, but for how long?" John turned to the others. "This isn't about thrones anymore," he said. "This is about survival." No one argued. The real war had begun. The wind never stopped at the wall. It howled like a beast, clawing at the stones of Castle Black and biting through every crack in the wood. Snow fell so hard that it blurred the world beyond the gates. The air itself tasted of something wrong, not just cold, but unnatural. John stood atop the wall, cloaked in heavy furs, Ghost sitting silently beside him. Rob joined him, eyes scanning. "The endless white north. There's nothing out there," Rob said. John didn't answer at first. Then he said quietly, "That's what makes it worse." They could see no army, no fire, no movement, but they could feel something coming. Not just danger, doom. By the second night, men began to see things in their dreams. They whispered of pale children with frozen eyes, a giant made of ice standing in a ruined field, a woman made of snow singing lullabies in a dead language. Some woke screaming, others didn't wake at all. John ordered constant patrols and had the men sleep in shifts. Fires were lit all around Castle Black. Every torch, every brazier burned without rest. He didn't care if they ran out of wood. Let them burn the furniture, the doors, the very walls if they had to. Fire was life now. Then came the Raven. But it wasn't from the north. It came from the south. Black wings cutting through the white sky, a scroll tied to its leg with golden thread. It landed on John's arm without fear. He unrolled the parchment slowly. "To the one called Snow, I have heard the whispers of what walks in the dark. Fire will answer cold. Come to Dragonstone, Daenerys Stormborn." John's hands trembled, not with fear, but something closer to relief. Rob read over his shoulder. "Who is she?" "She says she's the last Targaryen," John said, "and she has dragons." Rob's eyes narrowed. "Another southern queen." John looked at him. "She's not the enemy." Rob didn't argue, but his silence was loud. John called a council that night. The fire pit roared in the middle of the room as John spoke. "There is no winning this. War with steel alone," he said. "We need fire, real fire. We need her dragons." Some scoffed, others muttered about mad kings and wildfire, but Lady Mormont stood. "If dragons are real, And they burn. We call her ally, or we die with honor and frozen bones. In the end, it was agreed Jon would ride south to meet Daenerys. Robb would stay and command the defenses of the wall. It felt wrong, leaving now. But Jon knew he had to. Every day wasted meant the Night King drew closer. And if Daenerys truly had dragons, they might be the only hope. Before leaving, Jon met with Robb in the old armory. "You trust her?" Robb asked. Jon looked down at the cold steel of his armor. "I don't know, but I trust what I've seen. Fire is the only thing that stops them." Robb nodded slowly. "Then go, but don't forget what we're fighting for." Jon smiled slightly. "I won't. Keep the North alive." They embraced like brothers, not by blood, but by choice. The next morning, Jon rode out of Castle Black with a small group, Ghost at his side, and the banner of House Stark fluttering behind him. The journey south would be long and cold, but in his heart, something had changed. Not hope, not yet, but purpose. He arrived at Winterfell 3 days later to resupply and say goodbye to the people he'd left behind. The castle was alive again, fires in every hearth, food stores being filled, blacksmiths working without rest. They were preparing for war, a different kind of war. Sansa met him in the courtyard. "You look older," she said softly. Jon smiled. "I feel it." They walked through the Godswood in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots. "She sent a raven?" Sansa asked. "The Dragon Queen?" "Yes," Jon said. "She wants to help. Or she wants to rule." Jon didn't argue. He knew better than anyone how power worked, but he also knew they didn't have the luxury of pride. "She has fire," he said. "That's all that matters now." Sansa nodded slowly, but Jon could see the doubt in her eyes. Later, Arya found him sharpening his blade. "I heard you're going south," she said. Jon looked up. "You always hear everything." Arya grinned. "Someone has to." He stood and embraced her tightly. "Stay safe, keep them strong." "I will," she said. Then her voice lowered. "Kill her if she turns. Queens are dangerous." Jon met her eyes and said nothing. By dawn, he was riding again. It took 2 weeks to reach Dragonstone, 2 long, silent weeks of blizzards, frozen rivers, and more than one close call with Lannister patrols. But when he saw the Black Stone castle rising from the cliffs, he knew he had come to the right place. The dragons were real. He saw them first from the cliffs. Shadows in the sky, wings like sails, eyes like fire. They circled above like gods, roaring as they dove toward the sea. And then he saw her, Daenerys Stormborn. She stood tall, silver-haired with firelight in her eyes. "You are Jon Snow," she said. "King in the north." Jon bowed slightly. "Not a king, just a man trying to keep his people alive." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Then we may have something in common." Behind her, the dragons landed, their wings folding like thunderclouds. The Cold War was about to meet fire. Jon had seen many things in his life. White wolves in the snow, men screaming on battlefields, bodies burned alive, and others who would not die, but nothing prepared him for the sight of a dragon up close. When Daenerys walked him through the courtyard of Dragonstone, Drogon loomed nearby, smoke trailing from his nostrils. The heat of his breath melted snow from the ground, and his golden eyes followed Jon like a predator, deciding whether to kill or spare. Daenerys spoke calmly. "He can smell fear." Jon didn't blink. Let him smell duty instead. The words made her pause. There was no flattery in Jon Snow, no southern charm. He was raw, cold, honest, a man carved from Winterfell stone. Inside the castle, around a long black table, Jon told her everything. About the wall, about the walkers, about Eastwatch and the dead ships, about the horn in the night and the blinking heads. Daenerys didn't interrupt, but as he spoke, her hands slowly curled into fists. When he finished, she asked, "Why should I believe you, he looked her straight in the eye, because I'm not asking for your throne, I'm asking for your fire. There was silence. Then Tyrion, standing quietly nearby, added, He hasn't lied once. That may be the rarest thing in this kingdom. Daenerys stood. I will come north, she said, with my dragons, with my unsullied, with everything. I have. Jon exhaled deeply for the first time in weeks, but Daenerys wasn't done. And if I see what you say, then the Iron Throne can wait. By the time the dragons reached Winterfell, the snows had turned to storms. Robb stood on the battlements, watching the sky as the beasts landed, like falling stars made of flesh. And fire! The soldiers gaped. The small folk crossed themselves, the direwolves growled, and for the first time in living memory, the north saw fire fall from the heavens. Jon stepped down from Drogon's back, Daenerys beside him. They embraced Robb, then Arya, then Sansa. But there was no time for reunion, because that night the horn sounded again, but not from the wall, from within the north. The Night King had not marched through Castle Black. He had gone around, through frozen rivers, through wild paths in the east. A northern village fell first, as Bearwood, then a second closer to Last Hearth. No survivors, no flames, only silence. Jon stood with his commanders, staring at the map. He's avoiding our strength. He's heading for Winterfell, but not to conquer it. Arya nodded. To bury it. Jon looked to Daenerys. We need to meet him before he reaches the gates. If we fight him inside these walls, we all die, she agreed. So they chose their field, the old battlefield north of Winterfell, where the first kings once fought the Andals. Wide, open, cold, perfect for fire and steel. The night before battle, Jon stood alone under the weirwood tree. Snow fell gently. Ghost paced nearby, restless. Daenerys joined him. You're not afraid, she said. I am, Jon replied. But I know what happens if I fail. She looked at him for a long moment. You still haven't told me who you are. Truly. Jon looked up at the heart tree. My name doesn't matter, he said. Only what I do with it. She reached for his hand. We do it together, he nodded. And for the first time, Jon Snow let someone carry part of the weight. The battle came like a storm. The sky turned black at midday. The snow froze midair. And then they came. Not marching, not riding, but crawling, climbing, and swarming like insects across the earth. The White Walkers, thousands, tens of thousands. The dead, they clashed with northern steel, with wildling axes, with the blades of the Unsullied, with the arrows of House Mormont and the spears of House Reed, and then, with dragonfire, Drogon and Rhaegal roared from the skies, burning swaths of the undead to ash. Men cheered, women wept. The fire was hope, but the Night King was not among the front lines. He stood atop an undead giant, watching, waiting, and when Viserion, the third dragon, dove from the sky to attack him, the Night King raised a cold hand, and threw a spear of ice. Viserion screamed. The spear pierced his neck. He fell in flames and black blood. The Night King did not blink. Jon saw it happen. He screamed, not in fear but rage. He mounted Rhaegal and flew straight toward him. Daenerys did the same. The sky cracked with dragonfire and cold wind. The two living dragons circled the Night King. Jon jumped from Rhaegal's back, sword in hand, landing on the snow with a thud. The Night King turned, and for the first time, Jon saw him up close. Blue eyes, pale skin like cracked ice, and a crown of frozen bone. You do not belong, the Night King said, voice like shattering glass. Jon lifted Longclaw. Neither do you. They fought, steel against ice, fury against silence. The Night King's blade moved like lightning, cold and smooth. Jon parried, dodged, cut, bled, but every strike seemed to slow him. The cold crept into his bones, and then The Night King stabbed right through Jon's side. Jon fell. Everything went silent. But before the Night King could deliver the final blow, a scream tore through the air. Drogon. Daenerys leapt from the dragon's back, grabbed a burning spear and threw it with all her strength. The spear struck the Night King's chest. He looked down, surprised, and then he cracked and shattered into 1,000 shards of ice. His army froze, then crumbled. The dead dropped where they stood. The war was over. Jon awoke 3 days later, bandaged, weak, alive. Daenerys sat beside him, her hand on his. "You died for us," she whispered. Jon shook his head. "I lived for you." Winterfell stood, but not as it had been. The North crowned Jon Snow, not as a Stark, not as a Targaryen, but as the protector of the realms of men. He refused the Iron Throne. Daenerys did not, but she ruled with fire and mercy, not madness. Robb returned to the north, Arya vanished west, and Sansa ruled Winterfell beside Maester Luwin's old seat. The wall was broken, but the cold was gone, and so was the dark, for now.